Before you listen to this BBC podcast, I want to tell you why I love podcasting. Hi, my name's Tommy Dixon, and I make podcasts for the BBC. I'm a big fan of stories, always loved a good book. But when I started commuting for my first job, I discovered podcasts. I was blown away by how a creative idea and the right mixture of sounds could take you into a whole new world full of incredible stories. You know, the type that make you go, wow. And that kind of inspired me to give it a go myself, which, to cut a long story short, led to a BBC training scheme and a whole new career giving other people that exact same feeling. So if you want to hear amazing stories that make you go, wow, like I did, they're just a tap or a click away on BBC Sounds.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast, delivering all the news and analysis you need about our national game before you've finished your morning coffee. It's Wednesday the 14th of February. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm Phil Goodlad. And coming up...
Freaks back to Cortez, it's Barisic! Smashes it home into the left corner!
Can Rangers draw level with Celtic again as they face Ross County and their new boss? Also...
If I looked at that game on Saturday and thought about the next 15 games, I wouldn't sleep because we were poor in a lot of areas.
Will Neil Warnock get a good night's sleep after tonight's game with Motherwell? Or can the Steelmen bounce back from Morton misery? And
I come to a club for one of the very few times in my career where it has an upward feel to it. Here I come in with a great foundation on the back of the great work that Andrew's done here over the last couple of years.
just why is Brendan Rodgers' job like going on stage after the Rolling Stones?
This is the Scottish Football Podcast from BBC Sport Scotland.
Yes, great to have your company today. Valentine's Day, who better to spend it with than sports reporter for the Press Association Anthony Brown and the former Northern Ireland, Partick Thistle and Motherwell defender Stephen Craigan. Gentlemen, hello and happy Valentine's Day.
Good morning to you.
Morning.
One thing from Scottish football that you love. Anthony, start with you.
I think the passion would be up there. It's certainly got a bit of extra sort of, intensity. I think a lot of the foreign players coming in from England perhaps get a bit taken aback by just how intense and how passionate supporters are up here, and it can manifest itself in people being very demanding, sometimes not to the betterment of the players who have to deal with it. But I think that's probably one of the endearing features of Scottish football, that the people that do follow the teams they devote their life to it. I know that probably happens all over the world, but it seems more intense in Scotland, and I think that's something that we all quite like about it.
Anthony, then Stephen, a passion guy for Valentine's Day when it comes to Scottish football. What do you love about our game?
Well, it's funny, that's probably the standout thing, isn't it? Just how much affection we have for our game. We're also probably our own biggest critics, and then we get upset when someone else criticises it with the country. So we're very, we take a lot of pride in what we do. Is it the best game in the world? Probably not, no, but it's certainly competitive. And, the drive that the supporters show, even when things are going wrong, they like to turn up and support the team. We're not big in numbers, but certainly big in voice. So I think everything just around Scottish football, about the excitement and the energy and the drive we have all for it, certainly makes it exciting for me.
There we have it. Love for Scottish football already so early in the day. Whatever you think about Scottish football, one thing is for certain: we're never tired of a talking point. Plenty to get through with Anthony and Stephen. Firstly, let's quickly rattle through the latest Scottish football headlines. Rangers can go top of the Premiership if they beat Ross County tonight by 2 goals or more at Ibrox. Neil Warnock says his side need to take the pressure off Bojan Majowski as they prepare to take on Motherwell at Pittodrie. In League One, Alloa beat Annan 2-1, while Kelty Hearts overcame Edinburgh City by 3 goals to 2. In League Two, Dumbarton and Spartans ended goalless. The Scotland defender Scott McKenna made his Copenhagen debut as his new side lost 3-1 at home to Manchester City, this in the Champions League. And the Hearts chief executive, Andrew McKinlay, says the club's new Tynecastle Hotel will make them millions and help them to bring in new players and keep established starts in Gorgie. Gentlemen, let's start with the game tonight at Ibrox. Rangers against Ross County. If we keep with the theme of Valentine's Day, there will be even more love shown to Philippe Clement, Stephen Craigan, if his side can beat Ross County 3-0 tonight and go top of the league.
Yeah, it's great motivation for the players. I mean, you consider where the club were or what direction they seemed to be headed in when Michael Beale left. If you'd have said back then that come this time of the year, Rangers would have a chance of going top of the table and overcoming Celtic, I'm not too sure many people would have believed you. So I think that just tells you about the turnaround since the new managers come in, the energy, the confidence, the belief that the players are showing. And it's funny, I speak to some Rangers supporters going about and they seem to think that there's something missing in the team. And I don't really understand what it is they mean. Possibly a little bit of flair at times, maybe a little bit of excitement, they said it sometimes. But when you consider how well the manager's done, the games he's won, the trophy that he's won, the top two Europa League group, they've closed the gap, they're on the shoulders of Celtic. I find it hard to be critical, or I find it hard for people to see there's something missing. So, listen, that's what we talk about in Scottish football. We think things are going well, then suddenly there's always a little bit of criticism coming, and that's just the fact of life we have to deal with. So, I think it's a huge night for them. I'd be very surprised if they don't overcome Ross County. Will they get the required goals? I would imagine they will. So, then suddenly it changes. They then become the team who's being chased as opposed to the chasers. And rather than thinking then, if you go top of the table, you take your foot off the gas, you start to look behind you and admire, it's the complete opposite. But the one thing you get about Philippe Clement, he has that drive. And I don't think he'll allow his players to take his foot off the gas.
Anthony, you've covered Scottish football now for many a year. Have you seen this before, that a team just gets into a winning vibe, a winning routine, and that they pitch up at 7:45 for a game or 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, and everything just sort of naturally happens for them?
I think we've seen it quite a lot with Rangers and Celtic over the years, when whoever eventually goes on and win the title generally has gone on a run like this at some point. I think the thing that makes this title race particularly compelling is we have two teams that look fairly evenly matched. I think maybe in the last couple of years Celtic have been pretty dominant under Ange Postecoglou. The year before, Rangers sort of ran away with it under Steven Gerrard, whereas I think this one's got the potential to develop into one of those title races that certainly goes into the post-split fixtures and potentially goes all the way to the last day. Both teams are winning pretty consistently. As I don't think they're probably as convincing as they have been in previous years in terms of battering teams by 3, 4, 5 goals every week. I don't think that's happening quite as often this season as it maybe has done in the past. But I think certainly Rangers at the moment are in a vein of form where they've obviously only slipped up once domestically since Philippe Clement came in. I think that was Aberdeen before Christmas. And Celtic, as much as there's this negative perception around them, are also in a good vein of form. So I think we're probably at a stage where if Rangers win tonight, they will probably both push each other and they'll both keep this level of consistency for a period of time. Either that or one of them might completely wobble and implode, but I just don't see that happening with either team. I don't think Celtic have got it in them at the moment to completely lose their way, and I don't think this Rangers team are going to lose their way very easily. So I think ultimately it's going to boil down to who can be the most consistent in this next 3 months of the season.
Stephen, what can we expect from Ross County tonight? The bounce that we all speak about when a new manager takes charge. Don Cowie, interim manager after the Derek Adams reign. I was going to say the reign of terror, but the Derek Adams era ended last week. You've been in the situation where a new manager has come in. Is it natural to want to be almost more motivated by a new face, that you're trying to attract the attention of a manager?
First of all, I think with Don Cowie already being around the club, you might not get that. If players are waiting for a managerial change, for a little bit of motivation, or a little bit of spirit to come into them, then clearly they have the problem, not the manager who's just left. I think you should always have that pride in your performance and always have that want to will to win. I get there's times when confidence is low, when you're losing games, and you don't feel good about yourself, and you're a little bit nervous and anxious. And I think having watched Ross County against Motherwell last Wednesday night, that's exactly what they were. They looked a really nervous, anxious team, and they were far too easy to play against. Simple long balls over the top. Motherwell won 5-0, and it could have been 10. If they turn up and put in that same performance tonight against Rangers at Ibrox that they did against Motherwell at Fir Park last week, they will lose by 10 goals still. It's as simple as that. So it's a huge night for Don Cowie. It really is. He's been around under Stuart Kettlewell. He's worked with Malky Mackay. He's worked with John Hughes. He's now worked with Derek Adams. So he's been in the background. He sees how the how the managerial seat works, what you have to do, how you have to prepare, how you have to see things. So it's a huge night for him, but it will also be a nervous night for him, because you know if you go to one of the Old Firm, as much as Anthony says they haven't been thumping teams 5 and 6-0, if you go and they reach their peak and you're way off at some time in your game, it can be a messy night, put it that way. So I think if he came out with his pride intact and his team had put in a strong enough performance and they could try and take positives to lead them forward, then he would take that. A win, I think it's a huge stretch for them. I mean, you talk about shocks in Scottish football. This would be right up there considering the form they're in. So I would expect Rangers to win. By how many depends on how well or how poorly Ross County play.
Anthony, let's move up the road from Ibrox to Pittodrie. 9th place Dons take on 8th place Motherwell. Neil Warnock in the papers this morning saying that if only he'd been at Pittodrie earlier, he might have done something in the January transfer window because he sees areas that they're short in. And I read that this morning and I thought, well, yes. I mean, this is what happens when you bring in a manager when the transfer window is over.
Yeah, I think as much as Neil's saying that, I also heard his press conference yesterday, and I think he is pretty comfortable with the situation. This is his speciality, coming in to take over a struggling team in February, March time, and just trying to get a tune out of whatever players they find. So I don't think he's complaining as such, but he's obviously been quick to identify where the weaknesses are in the team, and I thought it was pretty telling. A lot of managers maybe wouldn't say it outwardly, but he said something about the lack of leaders in the team. He says he likes leaders in his team, people who want to stand up and be counted, and we've only got one here, and that's Shinnie, Graham Shinnie, obviously. I think probably most people looking in from the outside would probably come up with the same sort of conclusion, but to hear a manager say it, you wonder how the other guys in the dressing room might take it, particularly centre-halves who kind of need to be vocal and need to be seen as...
Anthony, is that why he said it? Is he poking players with a stick?
I'm not sure. I think he's just an honest guy who speaks his mind. I mean, he went on to say that if Alan Burrows and Dave Cormack want to have these conversations with me to find out what the problems are in the dressing room and things like that, we'll have an honest conversation at some point. I don't think he said they're a genuine bunch. I don't think he has any gripes about the characters he's taken on, but obviously he is a manager who's sort of renowned for being sort of up and at them, in your faces, and probably wants that sort of aggression that naturally comes from having lots of leaders in the group. And I think probably from watching Aberdeen this season, they're clearly a competent football team when they're on it, but maybe when the chips are down, when things go against them, they do lose their way a little bit. I saw it at Tynecastle a few weeks ago. They played very well for probably the first 50 minutes in the game, should have been ahead. And then as soon as Hearts got their noses in front, you didn't see anything from Aberdeen. They just completely folded in the last sort of half hour. And I think, so probably what Neil's saying about lack of leaders is an issue. And I think that's, I mean, he obviously would have wanted maybe a little bit of quality in as well, but I think certainly characters would have been high up on his shopping list if he was able to bring anyone in January.
Stephen, a word on Motherwell. I mean, their fans must be suffering seasickness this morning. They hammered Ross County 5-0 last time out. You say it could have been 10. They then went down to Capello and got tumbled out the cup by Morton. What can they expect tonight at Pittodrie?
Well, clearly they want the team that beat Ross County. That's the team they want to turn up, and I think that was the biggest frustration, because that was probably one of their best performances of the season. And as a manager, you think to yourself, right, we've turned the corner, we've managed to get a little bit of consistency, we've kind of been growing since the winter break, our performances have been getting better and better. You then go and beat Ross County 5-0 and you think you've got a real chance in the Scottish Cup. Yes, you're going to a championship club, you're taking over 2,000 fans, there's a real opportunity to get into the Scottish Cup quarter-final. So to put out the performance that they did was disappointing, to say the least. I thought it was poor in so many aspects. I've said it continually this season, their Achilles heel is defending cross balls, whether it's set plays, whether it's open play. The first goal comes from a just simple ball into the box. That has to be defended better, and then they're on the back foot. The Morton fans are up, the players are up. So it's a real challenge for Stuart to say to his players tonight. I mean, considering the poor winless run they were on for such a long period of time, a win tonight takes them onto the brink of getting into the top six, which is crazy when you consider, I think it was 14, 15, 16 games without a win in the league, and suddenly now you find yourself potentially on the brink of top six. If they play the way they did against Morton, they've got absolutely no chance. If they play as they did against Ross County, they've got a little chance. So I'm expecting a performance full of hurt and remorse from what happened on Friday night. It was that bad, and they've let so many people down, because you think of the finances that the Scottish Cup generates for the club to try and stabilise and move forward. So I expect a big performance tonight.
Big night on Sports Sound ahead. Aberdeen, Motherwell at Pittodrie. Live commentary from Ibrox as Rangers take on Ross County.
You're listening to the Scottish Football Podcast.
Finally, the former Celtic boss, Gordon Strachan. He says that Brendan Rodgers following Ange Postecoglou at Parkhead has been like a band going on stage after the Rolling Stones. Stephen, Anthony, I'm more of a Beatles man myself, although I do understand the analogy that Strachan is putting forward. The Brendan Rodgers situation is fascinating. As a non-Celtic fan, looking at that, thinking this guy rewrote the record books when he was here first in Scotland. And now it just seems as if that's almost all been forgotten about. It's like the unspoken thing in the room that Brendan Rodgers is a tried and trusted manager at Celtic. There just doesn't seem to be that much love on a Valentine's Day for the Celtic boss, Anthony.
I think probably some of that stems from the acrimonious exit the first time around. I think obviously there was a lot of bad blood when he first went down to Leicester, and there was a bit of scepticism when he came back up the road as a result. So I think if he'd hit the ground running and continued to run all the way through the season and left Rangers in his slipstream, I don't think there would have been any of this chat at the moment. I think the problems naturally, as it always is the case in Glasgow, is that the other team are now doing very well and have closed the gap to a point where they can now go level with them. And the fact that Celtic are not probably, although they're still getting results, they're probably not playing with the swagger that they had in Brendan Rodgers' first spell, and they're certainly not playing with the same level of excitement that they played under the majority of Ange Postecoglou's time. So I think Brendan's obviously getting a bit of kickback off that. And as you say, it's sort of natural that if you have a popular manager, a successful manager, it is hard to follow in the footsteps of them. But I think if Celtic go on to win the league this year, that quietens all that noise. Ultimately, it boils down to how the next 3 months of the season pan out.
Anthony, if Ange Postecoglou is the Rolling Stones, which band is Brendan Rodgers at the moment? I'll come back to you on that one. Stephen, why is it always difficult, it seems, for a new manager to take over from a manager that's departed a club but left as a winner? Surely he comes in, all the players are in a winning mentality, they know what to do, you just put the same side out?
Well, if it was as simple as that, then we'd all be successful football managers and just follow those are the ones that went before.
There's that, yeah.
But managers have their own way of thinking, their own way of playing, their own style of play, the certain type of player they want. So it can be difficult to come in and try and replicate what the previous manager's done, considering if you want to go a different direction. I mean, it was always the theory that when Brendan came back that Celtic wouldn't play with the same dynamism that they did do under Ange Postecoglou. They wouldn't be as gung-ho. They wouldn't play as forward as quickly. And it's played out that way because Brendan wants a more cultured, slower build-up. But when you're playing against teams who have got 11 men behind the ball, it can be your own downfall if you play slow build-up football because everyone gets back behind the ball and it's difficult to break through. Whereas under Ange Postecoglou, it was let's get into midfield quickly, let's get it beyond, can we get Kyogo running behind, let's get the dynamic wingers going down the side and causing all sorts of problems. Throw into the mix as well, they sell Jota, who was probably one of their best players, for 25 million, and replace him with a player worth 3 million. Now, clearly there's a massive downgrade there, and that's not a criticism of the player coming in, that's just a fact. Cameron Carter-Vickers has been injured. Carl Starfelt has been sold, probably underrated a little bit. Rio Hatate hasn't always been fit, and Leo Labada hasn't always been fit. So you're trying to put out the same mentality and the same style of play, but with 5 or 6 players down and not being replaced. So therein lies the problem. However, I think Anthony's right. When Brendan came back, there was always going to be the cynics. There was always going to be the critics waiting for things to turn, drop a couple of points, and people were going to jump his back. He's just going to have to deal with it.
So what are you saying? Brendan Rodgers is like the genesis of Scottish football? We maybe don't appreciate the band, but they're always in the background and you know all their hits?
Well, I'm not a big music man, but I'll take your word for it.
Anthony, come on. Hit me as to who Brendan Rodgers is in the music world.
I'm the same as Stephen. I'm not a big music man either.
Well, listen, you can spend the rest of Valentine's Day deciding who Brendan Rodgers is in the music world, and you can tell your respective loved ones why you couldn't take them out for a meal because you were thinking about Brendan Rodgers and what musical band he is. We'll leave it there. Stephen Craigan, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Anthony Brown, you too. Enjoy the games tonight as Rangers take on Ross County and Aberdeen host at Motherwell. Remember, you can get in touch with us via our email address, scottishfootball@bbc.co.uk. You might even be able to come up with better band suggestions than me and the guys this morning. David Curry, Ian McCall and Raith Rovers captain Ross Matthews will all be in the chairs with you tomorrow for the Scottish Football Podcast. Remember, if you haven't done so already, subscribe and follow so you don't miss an episode. For now, though, enjoy Valentine's Day, and remember, Scottish football is not just for one day. The love is here all year round. Bye for now.
The Scotland Rugby Podcast is now available every Tuesday. Join me, Andy Burke and Tom English. Just head to BBC Sounds and subscribe to the Scotland Rugby Podcast.
It's just seismic stuff.
There's bucket hats as well.
Oh, really? Yeah. Is this a rugby podcast or is this a fashion podcast?
Why can't it be a bit of both?
Rugby. Let's get on to rugby.
There's a lot to be excited about.
Today's guest, John McGuigan.
Clubs are at the absolute bedrock of everything Scottish rugby's about.
The Rugby Sports Sound Podcast from BBC Radio Scotland.
You cannot help but be so excited.
It's going to be the centre of the rugby universe.
BBC Sounds.